Eruvin, Daf Pei Beis through Peiches, Daf Pei Beis. We begin Perek Ketzim Mishtatfin, some of the laws of Tchumen. The Mishnah says, Ketzim Mishtatfin B'Tchumen. How do you make an Eruv Tchumen and give a portion of the Eruv to other people? You put a barrel down, Maniach Esachavis, Va'omer, Harezeh L'chol B'nei Iri. This is for everyone in my city, for anyone who needs it. L'chol Mi Sheyelech L'beis Ha'avel O L'beis Ha'mishta. Anyone who needs to go to a house of mourning or a house where a celebration is occurring, that the Eruv should be for them. So the Gemara brings that the Mishnah gave examples of Beis Ha'avel and Beis Ha'mishta. Rav Yosef says, Ein ma'arvin elo dvar mitzvah. You're only allowed to make an Eruv Tchumen for dvar mitzvah, for something, a mitzvah purpose. Ma'ika mashmalan, the Mishnah said that. Beis Ha'avel, Beis Ha'mishta. The Gemara says, yeah, you might have thought Orcha Demil Sikatani. The halacha is no, an Eruv can only be made for those purposes. That's how we paskin. You need a dvar mitzvah. Examples of the Mishnah, Beis Ha'avel, Beis Ha'mishta. What does Beis Ha'mishta mean? Not just stam, a party. It means a party of Nesuin, a wedding. Other examples of mitzvahs, Lahakbol Pnei Rabo, to receive one's teacher of Torah, O Chavero Sheba Min Haderech, or a friend who has come in from a journey. The Mishnah Berurah explains that even if your chaver is not a chacham, he's an ordinary person, it's a mitzvah. He's Ba Min Haderech, that it's a mitzvah to receive him, to greet him. But he brings Ali Rabbi says, no, it means chaver chacham. It means in particular a chaver who is a chacham. Other examples, the Rama adds, a person wants to be mitayel on Yom Tov or Shabbos, go for a pleasure walk, a stroll, a pardes, in a garden, in a nice place. That's also considered simcha of Shabbos and Yom Tov. That's also a mitzvah. The post can give other examples. The Shulchan Aruch goes on. Or even if it's not a mitzvah, you have a concern, you have to evade some kind of trouble. You have to get away from enemies, bandits, and so on. If you make an Eruv for Dvar Mitzvah, the Rama Paskins, then once the Eruv was made for a mitzvah purpose, you're allowed to use it for travel, even of a non-mitzvah purpose. And b'diavad, even if you made the Eruv for a non-mitzvah purpose, the Eruv is valid. So, example of Mishta, which means Nesuin, a wedding, Sudas Erusin, a Vart, an engagement party, is also included. However, the Mishnah Berurah says that this is only if they're going to behave properly and if the wedding will be according to moral standards. But if it will be mixed dancing, bachurim b'sulos yachad, then it is not a mitzvah in order to go to such a party. Poskim say that you don't even make the bracha of simcha b'ma'ono. Some poskim say if there's going to be mixed dancing, unless the Mishnah Berurah says by going there you can stop this, that it is a mitzvah. If you can impose tighter moral standards, and certainly it's a mitzvah to go there. The other examples of mitzvah the Mishnah Berurah gives, the person has to go to arrange for matters of public concern, fakech l'eskei rabin, or to go to a bris milah, or to daven with a minyan. Pidyon shvuyim, and other cases are even sakana cases. You don't even need an Eruv, but even if it's not a sakana, if it's a matter of public concern or mitzvah, then you are allowed to. And again, when it says you want to go for a walk, the Ramah's example of pardes, going for a walk in a garden, a pleasure walk on Shabbos, again the Mishnah Berurah says, obviously we mean when such pleasure taking is mutter. However, b'vanasenu harabim, it's common, people go to these places and they hang out and they engage in hololus and mixing of the genders, charim and nekevas. That's not a mitzvah. That's mikri averi, he says. That certainly would not be a mitzvah, and that would not be a good justification to go to such places. It's a little bit unclear how far we extend the notion of mitzvah. So the example is simcha and onig Shabbos, going for a walk is allowed. Visiting your friend, maybe only a chacham, or if he came in Haderech, we saw. Not so clear. If you just want to go to visit your friend, you're in one side of town and you want to eat a meal on Shabbos with your friend on the other side of town, not like you don't have food for Shabbos. You have your own home. You can eat at home, but you enjoy seeing your friend. Is that considered something which is a mitzvah or not? I believe some contemporary posts can say it's also a mitzvah. If you enjoy seeing your friend, if it'll enhance your enjoyment of Shabbos, even that would be considered a mitzvah. Dafim, Pei Beis, and Pei Gimel, the Mishnah and the Sugi and the Gemara talk about the shir of an Eruv. So the shir is mazon shtei sudos, l'chal echad ve'echad. Eruv Tchumen, each person has to put down, there has to be food there for 2 seudos, 2 meals for every person who's using the Eruv. The Mishnah brings 4 opinions. Rabbi Meir says, mizona l'chol v'lo l'shabbos, 2 seudos, weekday seudos, not Shabbos seudos. Rabbi Yehuda says, l'shabbos v'lo l'chol, Shabbos seudos, not weekday seudos. The Rabbi Yochanan and Broka, Zevadim is kavon lahakel. One said they ate more during the week, one said they ate more on Shabbos. The Rabbi Yochanan Broka says it's 2 sudos when a kikar is for a punyan. 2 sudos mean that make up a kikar when a kikar, mikikar b'punyan, midalat son b'sela. When the price of 4 son is a sela, then a kikar made out of that much flour is the 2 sudos we're talking about. Rabbi Shimon says, shtei yados l'kikar. The 2 sudos are 2/3 of a kikar, such that a kikar is mishalosh l'kav, when there are 3 such kikarim to a kav. The Gemara then has a discussion of how big these shiurim are. The Gemara makes various ukimtas. The sugya and Rishonim and Achronim gets extremely complicated, but in a nutshell, there are 3 opinions. A kav is 24 beitzim. The volume of a kav is the volume of 24 eggs. Rabbi Shimon Shita is that, as he says in the Mishnah, that the 2 sudos are, you take a kikar, that's 1/3 of a kav, so the kikar is 8 beitzim, and that kikar is 3 sudos, and the 2 sudos of Eruv are 2/3 of that. So there are 9 sudos in a kav, as the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Shimon, and 2/3 of the kikar, which is 1/3 of a kav, meaning, so a kav is 24 bayim, 1/3 of a kav is 8 bayim, 2/3 of that is 5 1/3 bayim. That is the share of the Eruv of the 2 sudos, according to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says 2 sudos for Eruv purposes is 5 1/3 bayim. Rashi explains that this is a kula for Eruvin. In general, sudos are larger. In other contexts, the sudo would be 4 bayim, but for Eruv, Rabbi Shimon is mekil that 2 sudos is 5 1/3 bayim. Rabbi Yochanan and Broka Shita is simple. Rabbi Yochanan and Broka Shita is that we're talking about a kikar which is a 1/4 of a kav, so it is 6 beitzim, and the 2 sudos are 6 beitzim. And pras, the share of pras, half a kikar according to him is 3 beitzim, and the 2 sudos are 6 beitzim. There is a 3rd opinion. The Bach brings this based on certain Rishonim, the Tur. The Bach explains there is a 3rd shita that says the 2 sudos are actually 8 beitzim. That the 2 sudos for the purpose of Eruv are actually 8 beitzim. How do we paskin? We discussed this in the share last week also. The Shulchan Aruch says, like the Rambam, that the share is 6 beitzim. That the share is 6 beitzim. Elsewhere he brings Yesh Omrim that it's actually 8 beitzim. Some say that really is a question of the girsa. The Mechaber changed the girsa in the Torah to be 5 1/3 beitzim according to Rabbi Shimon. Some say it's only 5 1/3 beitzim. In any event, there are 3 different shitas in the poskim. The Mishnah Berurah brings from the Achronim l'chatchila, a person should be strict for 8 beitzim, and b'diavad we follow 6 beitzim, the share of the Rambam and the Iker share of the Shulchan Aruch. The Gemara goes on Pei Gimel. The Gemara says the share of tumas ochlim, the kibetza, the food the size of an egg, has ramifications for tumah. It's makabel tumah at that share, or it can transmit tumah with that share, according to some Rishonim. So the Gemara brings machlokas. Rabbi Nassim and Rabbi Dosa say it's a kibetza with a klipa, including its shell, an egg plus shell. The Chachamim say kamoa below klipas. The share of kibetza for tumas ochlim is a kibetza without its klipa. Rambam paskins, poskim accept this, that it is a kibetza without the klipa. So kibetza in the context of tumas ochlim is kibetza without a klipa. What about in our context? The 5 1/3 eggs, or the 6 eggs, or the 8 eggs of the share of 2 sudos for Eruv? There, the Mishnah Berurah paskins, based on the Achronim, that the share is 6 eggs with a klipa. And the truth is that the poskim explain that in general, when the share is just a standalone beitza, like tumas ochlim, or like for netilas yadayim, for other cases where the share is just a beitza by itself, that's when we paskin the share is beitza below klipasa. But whenever we use it, and netilas yadayim in particular is based on the laws of tumah. However, whenever we use the beitza as a unit of measurement, we count the kav. We said it's 24 beitzim. We count the revius as beitza machta. Whenever we use the beitza as a standard of volume measurement, then it is beitza im klipasa, the beitzim of kedei achilas pras. The whole idea, whenever you have to eat something like matzah, you have to eat it kedei achilas pras within a certain share. The pras is half the kikar of our Mishnah. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, the kikar is 6 beitzim. That's 2 sudos. The pras is half of that, so it's a gimel beitzim. According to the shita of Rabbi Shimon, that the share of the kikar is 8 beitzim. and a process half of that, it's 4 beitzim. That's why we have throughout halacha, we have the notion of gimel v'dal beitzim, either 3 or 4, depending on this machlokes. So that share, which is also based on using beitzim as a volume measurement, is also beitzim with a klipa. For the chiyuv chala as well, the achronim say the beitza is, we count how many beitzim, it's beitzim with the klipa. How much actually is the klipa? You can measure, and various poskim did, but we find a variety of assumptions about what percentage of a beitza is its klipa. What's the difference between a beitza with a klipa and a beitza without a klipa? Some of the early poskim had remarkably large shiurim for the klipa of a beya. The Vilna Gaon, based on, he doesn't say he measured, he based this on a kasha, and he says it's based on answering a kasha and the shir of Kazayas. The Vilna Gaon says that the shell of an egg is about 1/3 of the total volume of the egg. So the egg itself is 2/3 and the shell is 1/3. That's why a kizayis can be 1/3 of a beitza with its klipa and a half a beitza without its klipa, because the beitza without the klipa is 2/3 of the beitza with the klipa, which means the klipa is 1/3 of the total. That seems an incredibly high share for the size, for the thickness of an eggshell. Eggshell is always very thin. We use the term eggshell to mean a very thin layer of something. The Maril seems to say that the klipa is 1/4 of the volume of the beya. He says that a revius, the revius we use for kiddush, a revius is beitza umachza. It's 1.5 beitzim. That's 1.5 beitzim with the klipas, which equals 2 beitzim without their klipas, which indicates that he thought that the klipa was a quarter of the volume of a beya, which is also very large. Later poskim, contemporary poskim, say they measured, and they give much smaller percentages. Rav Chaim Noah, in his sefer on shiurim, the Grach Noah says that the shell is about 1/15 of the volume of the beya. Rav Chaim Benish said that the volume of the klipa and the air bubbles together is about 1/10 of the volume of the beya. So the Gaon and the Maril have these very large percentages, but the actual percentages as measured on modern eggs seems to be much lower. The Gemara goes on Pei Gimel. The Gemara says, if you have the dwellers of a chutzner, those who live on the ground floor in houses in the chutzner, and anshe mirpeset, those who live on an elevated area, if they didn't join in their eruv, if they didn't join in an eruv, so it says that different places in the chutzner, anything which is 10 tefachim high goes to the mirpeset, anything lower than that goes to the chutzner. The Gemara explains on Pei Daled that that's actually a little bit misleading. Anything that is lower than that actually goes to both of them. Ma'ila chatzer, afla chatzer, they can both reach it. Ushneim asurim. Any space that can be reached equally by both of them is a problem because they don't have an eruv together. So if they both have access to that space is asur to both of them. A space that's high up is only accessible to the merpeset, or not conveniently accessible to the chatzer. It's more accessible to the merpeset, is mutter for them. But anything which is lower and accessible to both is actually asur l'shneim. This is the basic rule. The Gemara has the Mishnah. The Gemara has other details, whether it's 4 tefachim close to the merpeset or not. So we bring these rules in the Shulchan Aruch that if they don't join in an eruv, and there are mounds or pillars, and you want to use different spaces on that mound, different levels on height of that mound. So the rule is anything which is accessible to both is asur to both. But if they're 10 tefachim high, then they're more easily accessible to the merpeset and less to the chatzir, then they're mutter to the merpeset. But only if, as the Mishnah says, only if they're within 10 tefachim of the merpeset, because then it's easy for them and not so convenient to the people on the bottom. But if it's more than 4 tefachim, you have a pillar which is more than 4 tefachim from the merpeset and 10 tefachim off from the ground, it's equally inconvenient to both of them, and therefore they're both asur. So anything which is, the Mishabur explains, the klal is anything which is easy for one, nachas, kal to one, and kasha to the other, belongs to that one. And anything which is shneim shavim, it's easy for both of them, or it's hard for both of them, that belongs to both of them, and it is going to be asur to both of them. The Gemara has details about exactly how we define easy and hard. The Brisa discussing this sugya, this general topic of easy and hard. So the Brisa says that if you have the Anshe Achatzer or the Anshe Aliyah, people who live down below, people who live in an Aliyah on an upper story who didn't join in an Eruv, so it says that, and you want to use ledges that come out of the walls of the structures, so anything within 10 tefachim of the ground is people on the bottom can use it and not the top because they're too high up, so it's easier for bottom, so it goes to them. Anything which is within 10 tefachim of the top, the top 10 tefachim is that shaykh to the people in the aliyah. They can use it. People on the ground can't. Anything in between, had the beini, more than 10 tefachim from the ground, less than 10 tefachim from the aliyah, beini, that is aser. Again, the same principle. Anything which is equal and they haven't joined in an eruv is aser to both of them. Anything which is more convenient to one than the other, it's mutter to that one, and it is aser to the other one. On Daf Pei Hey, the Mishnah discusses where you can place the eruv. The Mishnah says, "Hanosines eruvo bebeishar achsadru marpeset." These are structures. If you place the eruv in various structures that are not here, we're not talking about eruv tumen anymore. Here we're talking about eruv chatzeros. If you put the eruv chatzeros in these types of structures, beishar is a guardhouse, an entry into it's an entry, a small vestibule, an entry into into another area. Achsadra, a semi-enclosed porch-like area, merpeset, the kind of landing where people would leave the aliyahs. So Eino Eruv, that's not a good Eruv, it has to be placed into a base dira. Moreover, Hadarsham, if someone actually lives in those places, doesn't live in a proper house, he lives in a place like that, Eino Osir Love. He's not considered a resident of the Chatzer to cause problems for the Bnei Chatzer if he doesn't join them in an Eruv. The Mishnah gives other examples which are considered places of dira, Beis HaTeven, Beis HaBakar, Beis HaEtzim, different types of storage houses, Beis HaOtzros. That is an Eruv, and a Darsha Moser. You're allowed to place an Eruv there, and if someone lives there, he does have to join the Eruv Chatzeros or create problems for the rest of the Chatzer. Then Rabbi Yehuda says, Im Yeshem Tfisas Yad Shel Balabayas, we'll discuss Tfisas Yad soon, then Eino Aser. But dealing with the first part of the Mishnah, the Mishnah gives us the basic rule: you can't place an Eruv Chatzeros, in a building, in a space which is not residential. So the Ramah says, we place the Eruv in a Beis HaKnesses. Our minhag is, we place the Eruv in a Beis HaKnesses. V'chein nagu kadmonim. It's a long-standing custom. The Ramah says, I have to justify this. Why do I have to justify it? Mishnah Berurah explains, because we just said that you can't place the Eruv in a non-residential space. Beis HaKnesses might be physically suitable for residents. It has walls, it's climate controlled, might have comfortable benches to sleep on. It might be physically possible to live there. However, because of the Kedusha, you're not allowed to eat in a shul. Certain exceptions, people who learn Torah are allowed to eat in the shul, so they shouldn't have to mevatel their Talmud Torah, I think the reason is. But in general, you're not allowed to eat in the shul. We do eat in shuls, we have kiddushes and parties and so on, and posts can struggle to justify that. But classically, you're not allowed to eat in a shul, so therefore a shul halachically is not considered a base dira. So that's what's bothering the Ramah. So it's our minhag, we place the Eruv in the shul. So how do we do that? So the Ramah says the reason is because as we've been discussing, there are actually two different mechanisms Chazal instituted: Eruv Chatzeros, where the various residents of the Chatzer join together to carry within the Chatzer, and Shitufei Mavos, where the various residents of courtyards that open into a mavoi, into an alley, they make a shituf to carry into the mavoi. In the time of Chazal, they at least sometimes made both. Our minhag, as we've discussed, is to only make one. We only make one. We only engage in one of these procedures, and we're yotze both eruv and shituf with the same one. We use bread, matzah, and we do both at the same time, as we've discussed in previous shiurim. The Gemara has discussed it several times. Shituf makom, some come al shituf makom eruv, and so on. But our minhag is it's both. And since it is also a shtufei mavos, the shtufei mavos does not have to be placed in a base dira. Eruv chatzeros has to be placed in a house, but a shtufei mavos does not. So since ours is at least partly a shituf, it does not need to be placed in a base dira, and that's why we're allowed to place it in the shul. According to other reasons why the minhag was to do it in the shul, but this is the Ramah's reason. Now the Mishnah concluded, Rabbi Yehuda says that in Yesh Sham Tfisas Yad Shel Balabayas Eina Oser. If there's a resident in the Chatzer and the Balabayas has a Tfisas Yad, he has some ownership, some connection to that space that's being occupied by a different resident, then that person does not require Eruv Chatzeros. What is an example of Tfisas Yad? So the Gemara gives a somewhat unclear example. It says Chatzeros Shel Bunyus ben Bunyus. He was rich, Rashi explains. He would loan various houses in his Chatzer to others, and they would live there, but he still kept some of his stuff there. He kept for storage some of his possessions in those houses. So that's mutter. They don't aser on him. They don't say now he needs an Eruvin Chatzeros, because since it's his house, he only lent it to them, and he's still keeping some of his stuff there. That is called Tfisas Yad. Why do we pick the example of him? Because he was rich and he had lots of stuff. So he would keep his stuff in the houses even after he lent the houses to his guests. The Gemara goes on Pevav and gives examples of different types of kalim that would be Tfisas Yad. Yosed Shel Macharesha, the part of a plow. And then the Gemara brings a standard that anything which is Nital b'Shabbos, which can be moved around on Shabbos, Oser, that's not called Tfisas Yad. Davar she'eino Nital b'Shabbos, something that you can't move around, Eina Oser, that's called Tfisas Yad. Tanina Mihachi, if you have things that are Muktzah, then not Nital b'Shabbos, Eina Oser. If it's movable, then it's not called Tfisas Yad. This is how we pass in Shulchan Aruch. A person has many homes in the Chatzar, and he lends them or rents them, either She'ela or Schirus, to individuals, and he has Tfisas Yad, which means he has his possessions which cannot be moved on Shabbos, either because they're heavy, they're just too heavy to move around, or because they're Asr, they're Muktzah. In either of those two cases, then that's called Tfisas Yad. The Mechaber adds they have to be Asr l'talkum afilu tzarech makomo. Certain types of Muktzah, klishim lachta le'iser, you can move them if you need the space. So even though they are Muktzah, but you can actually realistically move them on Shabbos, l'tzarech makomo, that wouldn't be Tfisas Yad. It has to be something which is completely immovable on Shabbos. That is not considered, that's considered Tfisas Yad, and those who live in those houses don't create an Isser for the owner of the Chatzar. Why? Because since he has Kalim in those houses, they all become like his guests, and they can carry in and out of their houses, and he can carry, everyone can carry, even though there is no Eruv. However, this only applies if both conditions are met. The houses have to be his, and he has to have his Kalim there. If they're not his houses, he just happens to ask other people in the Chatzar, do me a favor, I don't have enough room in my house, please take some of my stuff in your house. That's not called Tfisas Yad, because they're not his houses. But if they are his houses, and he has his stuff there, that's Tfisas Yad, and an Eruv is not required. Mishnah Berurah explains, you can have Tfisas Yad either with the Kalim or Muktzah, or if they're too heavy, even if the heaviness does not create an Isra of Muktzah, since it's difficult to carry them away, that's called Tfisas Yad. And the idea is that they're all considered Archim, and they're only considered Archim, even though they're his houses, if he has Tfisas Yad. If he has no Tfisas Yad, even if he's allowed to put things there, even if the contract, the arrangement says, I may put things in the house I'm giving you, but if he doesn't actually have things, that's not called Tfisas Yad. Contemporary poskim debate whether Tfisas Yad applies when the landlord is a non-Jew, and he has various Jewish tenants in his building, and he has Tfisas Yad. Some say that's not called Tfisas Yad, because the whole idea of Tfisas Yad is that the Jews are called, the tenants are called guests of the owner. A Jew is not considered a guest of a non-Jew. Others say no, you can be a guest of a non-Jew as well, and Tfisas Yad applies to a non-Jewish landlord as well. Many Achronim say that Tfisas Yad only applies if the Kalim if the property he has there, the landlord has there, are for his own benefit. He has his stuff that he's keeping in the tenants in the borrower's house. But if they're furniture, if he has a furnished apartment and he has beds and other things, dressers, refrigerators that he lets the tenants use, that's not called Tfisas Yad, because it's not for his own benefit. It's for that's for their benefit. They want that. They pay extra for that. So that's not called Tfisas Yad. So many poskim say that Tfisas Yad is only if the landlord has property for his own purposes in the space he rented or lent to others. Others say, though, that no, that as long as it's his property, even if it's for the tenant's benefit, as long as the tenant has no right to just clear it out, the landlord says that part of the contract is the refrigerator stays there, the couch stays there, the bed stays there, that is called Tfisas Yad. And Ramosha says that even if the kalim are actually rented to the tenant, it's part of the contract, it's a furnished apartment. Nevertheless, as long as it is the landlord's property, that is still called Tfisas Yad. Also on Pevav, in the course of this discussion, the Gemara brings a very strange statement. It says, Rebbe Mechabed Ashirim, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi honored people who were rich, Rabbi Akiva also Mechabed Ashirim, honored people who were rich. Achronim struggled to explain why is someone who's rich worthy of honor. A tzaddik is worthy of honor, a Talmud Chacham is worthy of honor, maybe if he gives a lot of tzedakah he's worthy of honor, but why is the mere fact of his wealth, why does that entitle him to honor? Rikveger brings the Maril brought in the name of another German Chacham that Rebbe himself was rich. And Rebbe was afraid people would honor him because of his Torah, and he didn't want that, so instead he went around honoring people who were rich. This way, if they gave him honor, that would be because he was rich also, and they wouldn't be honoring him because of his Torah, so he wouldn't be making base use of the Torah. I don't quite understand that. I don't know why honoring rich people would have stopped them from honoring him for both reasons, because of his Torah as well. But Maril, they're clearly struggling to explain this very strange idea that they would honor rich people. Also, this doesn't really explain why Rabbi Akiva honored rich people. Rabbi Akiva was not rich. Certainly in the beginning of his career, he was extremely poor, we were told. Maybe later he was richer. Anyway, so on Daf Pei Zayin, the Mishnah talks about Gzustra. You have a platform that extends out over water, and you want to take water from that body of water onto the platform, into the house, through a hole in the platform. You can only do that if you erect a mechitza. The problem is, if the house is Rishus Yachid, and the water is in a carmelis, so you can't be motzi merishus l'rishus. The way to do it is that before Shabbos, you erect mechitzas, maybe even on Shabbos, but if you do it in a way that's mutter, but you have mechitzas that are 10 tefachim high, they can be bein milmala, bein milmata. As long as you have mechitzas that are at least 4 tefachim wide and 10 tefachim high, the standard share of mechitzas, that is fine. That's what we pass in Shulchan Aruch, that you have a window opens from the house onto the Gzustra, and the Gzustra you want to get water from up or down. So it says you have a hole in the Gzustra, a hole in the platform, you need to make a fence. How do you make that fence? It has to be 4 tefachim and 10 tefachim. Doesn't matter if it's attached to the Gzustra and extends downward, or if it's on top of the Gzustra, the Shulchan Aruch says. The Mishnah Berurah explains that the Mechaber says you can make the Gzustra wherever you want, that even if the mechitza extends down from the Gzustra, doesn't reach the water, that's called mechitza tluya. Normally we know if you have a fence that's open for the bottom few feet, the bottom more than 3 tefachim, that's called mechitza tluya, mechitza shegedi and bokenbo we've discussed. That's not a good mechitza, but on mayim, when the mechitza is over water, that's the kal hu shekila b'mayim, chazal were mekil, they allowed mechitza tluya as long as it's 10 tefachim tall and 4 tefachim wide. That's enough when the mechitza is over water. If you don't have a mechitza, you can't take water into the house, because that's from a carmelis to Rishus Yachid. You can't even take water onto the Gzustra, even if there are no mechitzas, because the mechitzas, when there are no mechitzas, it's still considered Rishus Yachid because since the house opens onto it, that gives the Gzustra itself a din Rishus Yachid, so you can't take water from underneath, which is a carmelis, if there are no mechitzas, to the Gzustra, which is considered an extension of the house. That would be called going from a carmelis to Rishus Yachid. You make fences, so it says that the fences have to be 4x4 and 10 tefachim high. They can descend from the Gzustra, even if they don't reach the water, as we've said. Certainly, you can build the mechitzas on the ground, around the water, even if they don't reach all the way up to the Gzustra. We say good asik in that case. So you have to have 10 tefachim. It doesn't matter whether they go up from the floor or down from the Gzustra. Mechaber says you can even make those mechitzas above the Gzustra, because then we say good achis, and we view the mechitzas as extending down all the way to the water. Here the Mishnah Berurah says some Rishonim disagree, and they say that you can't use mechitzas on top of the Gzustra, on top of the shelf, the platform that extends over the water, to extend down to the water. And the mechitza has to be under the Gzustra. Then, even if they don't reach the water, we say if they go halfway down, you can say they go the rest of the way down. But if they're on top of the Gzustra, that's not valid. You need to put your mechitzas under the Gzustra, whether they go up from the ground or down from the Gzustra. They have to be done in one of those two fashions. On Daf Peches, the Gemara continues discussing the details of this person who's taking his water out of the ground onto the Gzustra. Rabbi Bar Avuna says you can fill up water, however you can't pour water out. You can't pour your wastewater, your sewage water, into that water on the bottom. The Gemara goes back and forth. We pass in Lamaskana Ikadamri, Rabbi Bar Avuna said you're allowed to spill out the water. You are allowed to spill out the water, and that's how we pass. Now, from the Gemara, the way Rashi explains, the issue of whether you're allowed to pour it out or not is because you don't really care. Even though there is a problem of Hatzah, you're taking the water from your house, which is Rishus Yachid, it's going down into the bottom, and even if there are mechitzas there, but it's going to keep flowing, it's going to flow out of those mechitzas, it's going to end up in a carmelis or Rishus Harabim. So that's carrying, even if you do have a mechitzah, the water is going to flow and it's going to end up in a Rishus Harabim or a carmelis. Why isn't that Hatzah? So the reason is because Lo ichpat le. You don't care, Rashi says. As far as you're concerned, the water could just stay where it is and become absorbed in the ground. Doesn't bother you. So therefore, even if it goes, that's not a problem. l'maisa, halacha l'maisa, it is mutter because you don't care. That is how we paskin in the Shulchan Aruch. That as long as you have that mechitza, you're allowed to pour the water out as well. And even if it'll go outside the mechitza, it'll eventually go. It'll pass outside the mechitzas of the existra. It doesn't matter, as Rashi says again, because you don't care. That's not your intention. You don't mind. As far as you're concerned, the water could stay where it is, and you would be perfectly happy. The Biur Halacha brings machlokes. Some say that that's even if it's near a Rishus Harabim, it'll end up in a Rishus Harabim. It's still mutter because you don't care. That they bring that, the Acharon bring that b'shem Tosfos. But the Rashba says it's only mutter if it's not near Rishus Harabim, if it's only near a Karmelis. A Karmelis, they'll make it, if you don't care, it's mutter, not if it's near a Rishus Harabim. But this is all that it's not your intention, that you're not doing it directly, that you're, as far as you're concerned, it can stay where it is, and it happens to flow out. That's not. You don't care about that. What if you're going to pour it in such a way that you're sending it straight out, but you're doing it indirectly via grama? You're pouring it onto the walls of the house. That, he says, is a machlokes. Some say that since that's only kocho, it's indirect. It's pouring along the walls of the house. You didn't pour it straight outside of the mechitzas. You just poured it onto the house, and it flowed down the walls and flowed out. That's considered kocho, and therefore it's mutter. Others say it is aser, that kocho is aser. We'll discuss this machlokus more in a moment. This machlokus begins because, again, in our sugya, where the Gemara makes it clear that it would be that the Gemara makes it clear that our Gemara says it would be aser if the water flows out. The first opinion said it was aser if the water flows outside the mechitzas. Even l'maskana, lahalacha, the second opinion says it's mutter. That's because you don't care. But our Gemara makes it very clear that if you do care, if you're deliberately sending the water out of your house into a karmelis, it would be aser, even though it's only kocho, even though it's only indirect. You're not actually carrying it dal amos. You're just pouring it out, but you know it's going to flow and it's going to stream out. So that's aser, even though it's only kocho. The only heter in our Gemara is if you really don't care. If as far as you're concerned, it's going to stay where it is. That's mutter. But if you deliberately pour it in such a way that it's going to flow out into a karmelis or a rishus harabim, even though it's only kocho, it's kind of a grama, it's indirect. Our Gemara is mavur that it's aser. Yet there's a Gemara in Shabbos Tosfos says that when you can pour water off a boat, as long as you pour it kocho along the side of the boat, even though you're pouring from the ship, which is rishus yachid, into a karmelis, it is still mutter. So Tosfos says that if it's only a karmelis, like in a ship, that's mutter. Kocha b'karmelis lo gazru, that's what the Gemara says in Masechah Shabbos. Here, the Gemara says it wouldn't be a problem except for the fact that you don't really care. Here, it's because there might be Rishus Harabim. And then Rishus Harabim, they were gozer kocho to Rishus Harabim. And even though there's actually only a karmelis, it's exera. Today you'll pour it into a karmelis, tomorrow you'll pour it into Rishus Harabim. In the case of the Sfina, you're out at sea, there's no Rishus Harabim out there no gzera. But in a case of an ordinary karmelis, Tosfos' conclusion is that kocho b'karmelis is aser if it's not your intention for it to stay where it is. If you don't have the lo ichpad leisvara, if it's your intention for it to flow out into the karmelis, even though it's only indirect, it's only kocho, there is such a gzera. Other Rishonim disagree. Other Rishonim say kocho b'karmelis lo gazru, period. If the water is being sent out indirectly via koach and not directly, then it is mutter as long as it's a karmelis. This machlokes becomes crucially important in the next part of the sugya on Daf Peches. The Mishnah talks about sewers. The Mishnah talks about a biv, a sewer trench. The Mishnah talks about can you pour water into the trench on Shabbos. So the Mishnah brings machlokes Tanoim, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and the Chachamim. And the sugya discusses various problems, various types of bivs, and so on, and absorbent materials and non-absorbent materials. One of the heterim is that when you pour the water in, it'll just get absorbed in the trench itself. It won't flow all the way out into the Rishus Harabim. So halacha, there are all kinds of details or not. But the way the Shulchan Aruch concludes is that the heter to pour into the biv, halacha l'maisa, the heter to pour the water into the sewer channel is only if the heter is only if it'll be absorbed. If it won't be absorbed, then it's aser. But that isser to pour it into a sewer that won't absorb it and will send it out into Rishus Harabim is only into Rishus Harabim. But if the sewer feeds into a karmelis, then it is mutter. Even if sachama, there's not going to be any absorption. It's not going to absorb. It's still mutter because again, the Shulchan Aruch paskins that kocho b'karmelis is mutter, like the Rambam, like the Rashba, like other Rishonim, not like Tosfos. The Shulchan Aruch, the Machaber paskins, kocho b'karmelis is mutter. As long as you're not doing it directly, you're pouring it again into the biv, and then it flows and it goes into the karmelis. That's mutter. Into Rishus Harabim, it's aser unless it absorbs, and other cases, but the pouring it into a non-absorbent sewer pipe is mutter if it goes into a karmelis, aser if it goes into a Rishus Harabim. The Ramah says, however, Yesh Omrim Tosfos. Tosfos says kocho b'karmelis is aser. It's only mutter when you're out at sea and there's no Rishus Harabim nearby, so there's no gzeira. But kocho b'karmelis is normally aser, he says. However, he says kocho b'karmelis is aser inside a city. A karmelis inside a city. Then we have what Tosfos said. There were gozer kocho b'karmelis because of kocho outside of karmelis. But outside the city, where there is no Rishus Harabim, it's like the case of the ship at sea. Then there were not gozer kocho b'karmelis. So we have a major machlokas here, Rishonim, machlokas, Machaber, and Ramah, whether indirect pouring out sewer water where it's going to end up in a karmelis is that mutter or aser. And I'm belaboring this point because this is a major question. How are you allowed to flush your toilet on Shabbos? Why are you allowed to flush your toilet on Shabbos? Obviously, we know that it's mutter. The question is why. The wastewater, or the sink, when you pour water into the sink, that water flows through pipes. And it ends up, I don't know where it ends up, but eventually it ends up in some kind of karmelis. And eventually it ends up outside an Eruvin, very likely. So how are you allowed to do that? How are you allowed to flush the toilet? How are you allowed to, assuming it goes into a karmelis, not into a Rishus Harabim deraisa, so according to the Machaber and some Rishonim, that's fine. That the Isser of the kocho is mutter in a karmelis, as long as, even if it's your intent. This is not the case where you'd be happy if it stays where it is, like the first Gemara. The first Gemara said you're allowed to spill the water out. And then you let to spill the water out because, as far as you're concerned, it will stay where it is. Lo echbadle. You are echbadle. You don't want the water to stay inside your pipes. You don't want certainly your toilet water. You don't want it to stay in the toilet. You don't want it to stay in the pipes. That would not be good at all. You want it to flow out into where it's supposed to go, into the karmelis. So l'chara, according to the Ramah, that should be aser because the Ramah says that kocho b'karmelis is aser, at least if it's a karmelis inside the city. So again, if it flows outside the city, that would be fine. But if it flows to some place which is a karmelis inside the city, that could be a problem. So the Chazon Ish explains our custom. Our custom is to be lenient, he says. Anu nagin heter b'davar, we are lenient about flushing the toilet, even though he says our pipes are metal, they don't absorb. So we don't have that heter, he says. And we're machmer like the Ramah. We're machmer that kocho b'karmelis is aser if it doesn't absorb. So why is it mutter? So the Chazon Ish says because our pipes are considered makom p'tur. The sewer trench in the time of Chazal was not a makom p'tur. It was either Rishus Yachid or a karmelis. It was an open trench. You can access it. Our pipes are narrow. They're sealed. You can't really do anything useful in the pipe from the house, even though it does connect to your toilet. It connects to your house. You can't really use it in any meaningful way. So even though normally an extension of a Rishus Yachid, a chor, a hole that extends out of a Rishus Yachid is Rishus Yachid, that's only when you can use it in some way from the house. Here, the only use you have is sending out the toilet water. That's not considered something you can use. So those pipes, because they're small and they're narrow in diameter and they're not accessible from the house, those pipes are makom p'tur. So what you're doing when you flush the toilet is you're sending the wastewater from the Rishus Yachid, from your house, from your bathroom, out eventually into a karmelis through a makom p'tur. That's mutter. The Ramah says that's mutter. When he discusses the sewer, the Ramah says if the sewer pipes go 10 tvachim above the ground, 10 tvachim above the ground is a makom p'tur. So even if they end up in a karmelis, that's fine. If the waste goes from your house through an elevated aqueduct of some sort, above 10 tfachim, which is makom p'tur, the Ramah says, then if it's l'mal me'asara, then it's makom p'tur, even if it ends up in a karmelis, it's mutter. So the Chazon Ish's chiddush is that our sewer pipes, even though they're not above 10 tfachim, they're considered a makom p'tur because they're sealed off, and therefore the waste is going from a Rishus Yachid through a makom p'tur to a karmelis, and therefore it is mutter. The reverse also, he says, the water that, the pipes that bring water into your house, even if that water is coming from a karmelis and is ending up in your house, he says, it's also mutter, because once again, the pipes are considered chorim of a karmelis. There is no chor to a karmelis, so the pipes are considered makom p'tur. The chorim of a karmelis don't have the din of a karmelis anyway. And also, he says it's only grama. When you open, you just open a spout. I'm not sure why flushing the toilet itself might be considered grama also, but he says opening the faucet is only a grama, he says, and it is not a problem. Similarly, I saw in a contemporary work that discusses halachas relevant to army service, they talk about using a sink in the field sink, where you turn on the water and then the water flows out. The water after you wash your hands or whatever, it flows out, and it flows, and there's no Eruvin. It might flow into a Carmelist, so even if it goes from a Rosh Hashanah to a Carmelist, or it flows 4 Tvachim in a Carmelist, 4 Amos in a Carmelist, so even though that would be a question of Hotzah. But again, according to the rules that we've seen, this whole problem, some Rishonim say that Kochel B'Karmelis is mutter entirely. Only in Rosh Hashanah it's Asur. Even if your intent it's mutter. And even according to the Ramah, that we're Machmer, that we say Kochel B'Karmelis is Asur, that's only inside the city, where there's Rosh Hashanah around, and there's Xera. Even if we don't have real Rosh Hashanah's Bisman there, the Ramah says we're still Machmer, that there goes there Kochel B'Karmelis inside a city where potentially there could be a Rosh Hashanah. But outside the city, where there is no Rosh Hashanah, it's simple Carmelist. There was no Xera, like the ship at sea. Therefore, this Sefer says the halacha is if you're using a field sink in a military camp outside the city where there's no Rosh Hashanah, it's a simple case of kocho b'karmelis where there's no Rosh Hashanah around, and therefore it would be mutter to use the sink even if you are causing the water and you intend the water to go from Rosh Hashanah to a Carmelis or 4 Amos in a Carmelis. Since it's only kocho, it's indirect, and there's no Rosh Hashanah around. In such a case, everyone agrees that kocho b'karmelis is mutter.